How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today, I have got a very special guest for you all. Today, I'm joined by a four-time Paralympian winning a silver medal at the Rio 2016 Paralympic Games. Today, I'm joined by the one and only Ali Jawad. How are you doing?
Hey, good. How are you?
I am very well, thank you. Thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on.
Pleasure.
So how are you? What have you been up to recently?
Yeah, it's been action packed for me. So I'm doing kind of two things at the moment. So I'm studying for a PhD, and also I've got a startup. So it's quite busy.
So plenty of things to keep you out of trouble then. And what's your PhD in, and how's the startup going?
Yeah, so the PhD is in basically anti-doping and cheating methods in parasport, which is obviously quite a controversial topic. And then obviously last year I launched a fitness app, especially designed for people with disabilities. So I think it's the first one in the world as well. So it has been a roller coaster year because obviously like I'm not really a tech or entrepreneur, so I've had to learn.
Yeah, definitely. But with that, that makes it, from seeing the smile on your face, it's like, a good project to be working on. Obviously, I did quite a brief introduction there, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot more of the topics, especially when you mentioned about the app, about your PhD, which we'll get into a little bit more as we dive into the episode. But for everyone listening who might not know your background, involved in training, obviously getting doing your PhD and the app. Just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself.
Yeah, so I guess my background is actually in elite para sport. So my sport was para powerlifting, which is basically just the bench press. I've been to 4 Paralympic Games. I've been lucky enough to have won every single major medal on offer. World records, world number one for a few years. And still, yeah, like for me, and I've benched over 200 at 56 kilo body weight, raw, by the way, not shirted if people want to come at me. But yeah, that was my old life. But I guess looking back, I'm like, how did I do that?
And because especially with that, 200 kilo bench press, how did you start getting involved in strength training? Because obviously, from there, breaking world records, the success that you had, how did you get involved in strength training? And did it get to a point where to get into the elite level, how serious, when did it become serious, to be lifting those weights?
Yeah, I guess I need to like put it into context. So ever since I was about 6, I've always wanted to be a Paralympian. I guess I just had to have a sport that I was good at. So as a kid, I tried multiple sports, so judo, athletics. And then when I was about 16 during my GCSEs, my friend kind of forced me to the gym across the road from my school. Now it was a proper, spit and sawdust gym, quite old, like Rocky Balboa style, which was actually I like that because I grew up with Rocky in terms of the films. And obviously I've never been to a gym before, never did weights. But my first day ever in the gym, I lifted about 100 kilo bench press.
Right.
Yeah, I was 16. I was probably like middleweight. So I weighed about 65 kilo at the time. But yeah, the whole gym kind of stopped. And then the owner got told, and then he came down and said to me, like, if this is your first time, you have to come back. And that's how it happened.
Yeah. And then how did that progress in terms of, competitions, and how did your, training and, nutrition, over time develop? Because, I love that as a story. I love the Rocky films myself, going in and catching that powerlifting bug, if you like, or that strength training bug, because it all starts, with a story like that, or because we enjoy it. How did that kind of develop over time?
Well, I guess for me, it was like the first conversation was you've got a shot at the Paralympics, which obviously excited me at 16. But also within 2 weeks, well, actually, the timing was actually weird because within 2 weeks there was a British Championships. But the thing is, I'd missed the entry date, obviously. However, they did allow me to compete as a guest, but I ended up winning it. That's 2 weeks after I started. So obviously you get spotted by the national team when you've got a 16-year-old beating all these seniors, and then yeah, when you get into the national team, it becomes a different level of seriousness, because you talk about maybe like, they want you to start training as part of the team, and then you're probably there for like 6 months with a few training camps, and then they kind of ask you to commit for 6 months in terms of maybe 3 or 4 times training a week with your coach. Come to training camps, see how you developed. Can they take you to competitions? Can you handle that pressure of training camps and being actually more strict in your lifestyle? How do you live? How do you live outside the gym? Have you got the attributes to be a world-class athlete? So everything at 16 was changed from, being this carefree teen to being, kind of cast into a world where it is a very strict lifestyle to reach that sort of level.
Yeah. And with that, was your because obviously with the coaching side of things, were your coaches the national coaches? Did you have your coach at the time, or was it just sort of like with the national setup?
No, so how it was then was I had kind of 2 personal coaches. So because they worked in the same gym, so they kind of like took it in turns, because one was quite old and one was more my age. So they thought that complemented each other pretty well.
Yeah.
When you got into the national team, initially they will work with your coaches. And then when you start getting funded, they have, I wouldn't say way more control, but they start kind of dictating how they think you should live, basically.
Right.
Because obviously they don't want to, you don't want to invest in somebody that's going to be going out raving every Friday after training. So the good thing about my setup was my personal coach used to be the national coach.
Right.
So for me, it was like I knew early on what I had to do, so that means it complemented what the national team wanted and what my coach wanted. So there was never any big arguments. I guess the big thing was actually when I had to move to the National Performance Centre, and that's when the national team had pretty much full control.
Right. And with that, because obviously you said there, at 16, going from, having just walked into the gym, benching 100 to then being in that setup of that structure, and that routine. What were kind of the challenges or struggles with that? Because sometimes it's a case of, you get a couple of competitions underneath your belt, and then you gravitate more towards that. How did you find that? And then, were there any changes throughout sort of your lifting career where it changed a little bit and, maybe pulled back a little bit? I know obviously the success that you had, but was there any changes as you sort of went through, and obviously as you got older as well?
Yeah, so I think it probably changed through time with different phases of my career. So I'd say in the beginning, the strictness wasn't as much because I was only 16. They wanted me to enjoy it and not be put off by the standard. However, my personal coach said that good juniors can beat seniors. So he didn't protect me. He said, look, you're going to be competing. I'm going to put you against seniors. We're not going to just go for the junior competitions. So early on, I realized what it took to really be at their level. Because obviously as a junior, I was very good. But then when I went to the senior competitions, I thought, I'm not that great. Because like when I get to 21, 22, 23, and you become a senior, you'll be nowhere near them. So from 16, I realized that actually I had to live in a way that the seniors lived. So I wasn't going out. I was planning and organizing my life in a way that kind of made me recover from training, and I was ready for training, and like everything was kind of centered around just being the best it can be quite early on, because that was installed in me from my personal coaches, which actually complemented the national coaches really well, because they thought the 16-year-olds given up quite a lot quite early, which is good.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned there obviously things outside of the gym, in terms of recovery and all those sorts of things. How did that change over time as well, or was there any points where you thought, oh, actually, you mentioned there, if we were going out raving, and it's like, right, okay, how do we change that around? Did that change over time, or was there anything where it was a case of, right, okay, I need to, push a little bit more, especially, the world records that you broke as well? Was the times where, it was a little bit more intense, if you like?
Yes, I'd say like when I was very young, we'd probably like periodize when I'm allowed to really go out and let my hair down, only because they still wanted me to have fun and still hang out with mates. So that was all planned. I guess when I got older and I got better, that became the lifestyle became really strict in terms of, because you're dealing with fine margins and your training is monitored to to the T. Any little tiny change in that is a big effect on your on your lifting. So for example, like if you're in week 4 of your training block, which is obviously the hardest block, hardest week in that block, you don't need to be going out the week before, because you're gonna not recover. However, you could potentially get away with hanging out with people in week 1 when it's
Yeah,
like a
yeah,
recovery week. So everything was kind of we will organize it in a way where balance was key, but training came first, recovery came first, nutrition came first, sleep came first. So like, yeah, it was a lot of planning. I guess when I progressed through the years.
yeah. I think the key thing that you said there was the balance side of things, because I know obviously you're speaking about there, it wasn't or maybe at times it might have felt like a dictatorship, but keeping with the training and those sorts of things, there still has to be some flexibility in there, especially like what you said, week 1 might be different to week 4, because if it is the heaviest week of training, yeah, there's nothing worse than walking into the gym if you've got a banging head from the weekend or anything. With that as well, and now that you sort of maybe look back at your lifting career, even though starting at a real young age, kind of maybe two questions on this. What were sort of the opportunities that getting involved in strength training allowed you to do, to experience? But then also, what were the lessons that you learned from the gym that has kind of carried with you outside of the gym, if that kind of makes sense?
Yeah, so I guess the experiences, I was quite lucky in terms of traveling around the world. Um, Obviously, getting funded at 16, like not many 16-year-olds earn what I did, and did it by just going to the gym. That's what I thought at the time. I was like, I'm going to the gym, I'm getting paid for it. I can't believe it. Um, Even though it was like pretty small compared to what it was still something. I guess also as well, you get a lot of like you make a lot of friends globally. You actually grow up with your rivals, like because you are competing against them from junior age all the way up to retirement. So you do make lifelong friends. But also as well, like when you get better and better, you got opportunities. When you go into events and you get invited to VIP parties, and you actually do get to live the other life to when you're actually quite good. You get invited to all these events that you'd never think you'd be associated with at all. I guess. What was your second question?
So in terms of the strength side of the strength training side of things, a lot of people, I'm a big believer in terms of the strength that you get in the gym can also replicate outside. I think people can learn a lot of good lessons, and from you training, especially going on to do your PhD, obviously doing a startup as well. What were kind of the biggest impact that going to the gym had an impact outside of the gym as well, in terms of your mindset, in terms of the goals that you had outside of the gym as well?
Yeah, so I guess the big one for me was patience, trusting in a process that is unpredictable, and you have to be adaptable and flexible within that process. Getting through adversity as well, big one. I guess the biggest thing that I learned was to not focus on any outcome, because any outcome is a distraction. Because somebody said to me that if you've only got one eye, if you've got one eye on the outcome, you've only got one eye on the process. And if we miss anything, it could be catastrophic.
Yeah.
So do what you can do every day, accumulate enough consistent days, and you're going to have a good shot. So yeah, I never really focused on the outcome when I was older. It was all about, right, what am I doing today? What am I doing tomorrow? And every day I took it as it came. But that required a lot of planning and monitoring, and also being adaptable and flexible on the actual day of training. So even if, I need to be able to understand my body to think, right, I'm not going to do what's programmed today, but what can I do today to still make it effective and stimulate growth and recovery? So yeah, like I know a lot of people like ego lift, they like putting weights on and getting stronger and stronger every day, but I'm a big fan of velocity based training,
Yeah.
because that's got me to where I am, because it's actually just a little bit, it gives you more control.
Yeah, definitely. And this might be a little bit of a tangent there, but it's a little bit like what you said there about the ego lifting, and you were thinking about, right, what can I do today, even if it isn't planned in terms of training. What is it that I can do to allow me to get ready for a competition, or get those extra margins? Do you think that's where maybe sometimes a lot of people go wrong, and that's the difference between training and working out, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so when I was obviously growing up, it was all about ego lifting. How much can you improve? Like, want to not max out every session, but improving that rep range every session. And obviously, progress is not linear. You're going to have a massive dip eventually, and that hits home quite hard. So, I remember, like when I used to have bad training sessions, it used to actually affect my life. I was miserable to be around as a kid when I had bad session, and then probably 2012, when we started using velocity based training, I realized that actually your potential changes daily. So, what can you do that day, in line with your potential that day, to stimulate growth for that day and still
Yeah.
contribute to the bigger picture? So, I became more kind of self aware, because you kind of had like an external, objective measure where actually it kind of calls your bullshit and your
Yeah.
bias.
Yeah.
Because you can say, "Oh, I feel incredible today," but the numbers, when it comes to monitoring, are not there. So you can actually, instead of pushing and hurting yourself, because injury is a big risk,
Yeah.
you actually hold back, do what you can that day to still progress and still be happy that you've contributed to the process. Yeah, rather than going absolutely nuts that you've had a bad session. So yeah, like for me, I learned that actually. Um, Leave your ego and your bias at the door and have some sort of objective measure to track what you're doing, because that is a big kind of, for me it was a big learning, about how my body worked, how I recovered, what my body can tolerate, and also how I had to live, to give me them benefit gains in the gym. So everything was monitored in a way where every aspect of my life, kind of contributed to what was going on in the gym. So yeah, you have to always have an objective measure.
Yeah, definitely. And as well, I think there's more access to sort of velocity-based training as well. I know obviously it can range in terms of the equipment that you're having, but I think a lot more people, especially within the strength sports, are using them a little bit more, and it isn't always a case of I've had conversations where it's like, oh, we just need to put more weight on the bar. Why did that feel rubbish? Whereas actually, you kind of summed it up there. What do you need to do that day? Even if we're feeling good, you can still create that stimulus. And one thing that you mentioned a little bit earlier as well is that balance a little bit more, because if our training's going up and down and our mood's going up and down, we're not having that consistency. We're not being able to progress going forward. In terms of that, like when you mentioned when you're obviously younger, not being the best person to be around if a list hasn't gone well, but did that over time be able to allow you to still enjoy training? Because I know sometimes people can think, the more apps we involve, the more gadgets we involve in our training, it becomes all consuming. Whereas actually, did you still enjoy it? Because I can imagine, there's probably a little bit of competitiveness there when it comes into the velocity-based training, trying to hit those numbers. Would that be right? What are kind of your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think in the early stages, I was always looking at what my speeds were. So obviously, it doesn't matter how bad the training sessions were previously, you're always trying to hit PB speeds. Because if you get PB speeds, you can actually push that session because your body's allowed you to do it. Um, I guess from my point of view, um, there were obviously periods where when training weren't going great, it wasn't. I guess you had to accept that with any training program, you're going to have phases in a year where there'll be a dip.
Yeah.
Like you can't peak every month. But you have to remember we had to peak for competition. So even if that peak, if that dip wasn't in competition time, who cared? Because that dip was needed to peak for competition. So for me, like I had to put it into perspective that actually, luckily, it wasn't at any major championships. It happened. It happened, in the off season, to say. So, yeah, like sometimes you have to go right. What is the bigger picture? Is this part of the process? Yes. Do I need this dip so I can recover to really push on in future cycles? Well, yes. So everything was about actually like I always say it doesn't really matter what you do in the gym. Like it doesn't matter what you lift in the gym. It matters on the day when the pressure's on. So if that dip helps you achieve that optimal goal in competition, then it was just part of the process, and you have to be able to accept that without your ego taking a hit. And they always say like leave your ego at the door, and because weights can humble you.
Yeah, definitely. I thought that was really a really good piece that you said there, because especially I think people who are first getting involved in strength training and looking to get involved in competitions, it's all about that one competition. Whereas actually, just as an example, how long would you have between competitions?
Probably 3 and 4 months. So like I'd say like we'd have two national comps a year. So one British and one maybe Grand Prix event nationally, and then you could have up to 2 or 3 internationals a year, depending on the year. So for us, there'll be one major championship a year, and then you've got the regional championships. So you've got like I don't know the Pan American Open or the Asian Open or a Grand Prix event in Dubai. But there's always at least one Worlds or Europeans a year. Obviously, you
Yeah,
Commonwealth Games as well. Um,
yeah. And then with that amount of time, like what you're saying about the dip, about a dip in training, like you say, it could be actually work in your favor, because I think like what you've said about what can you do on that day, listening to your body. Your body's a pretty smart thing. It'll tell you if it needs a rest, or maybe you've pushed it a little bit too far. And I think that's where people can sometimes lose sight of the fact of it's not as though we're playing rugby or football or anything like that, where it's happening every single week. You're going to have time in between those competitions to be able to set yourself up from there. And then 100%, you talk about the gaps between major competitions, the bigger picture. 4 years between the Paralympic Games, that's the bigger picture. How were your experiences at the Paralympic Games, and being able to go to these different venues?
So I think every major is different. So as a kid, it was all about the Paralympic Games. That's where that's where you want to compete at. But actually, like if you look at every major championship in isolation, they're all very important because a lot of athletes when they retire, they only look at their major medals, their major championship medals. So because of the Europeans, Worlds, and Commonwealth Games are majors, they contribute to your medal haul in your career. So they become important to you in the process. Where for me as a kid, it was all about the Paralympics. They always say that the Paralympics is the biggest occasion like in the world, but actually, for us, it's the World Championships, which is the hardest to win
Right.
because there's a lot of lifters that are more lifters are allowed there from loads of countries, so you can enter more people. So if a country is strong, they've got 2 or 3 that could probably beat you rather than just one at the Paralympic Games.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so the way it's done is that actually the World Championships are very hard to win, and the Commonwealth Games are also very hard to win because it's done on a coefficient formula.
Right.
So it's not you lifting against your bodyweight class; it's you being combined with 5 other bodyweight classes put together. So you're really up. You're really going to have to lift a lot to have a shot.
Yeah. And did the tactics change maybe year to year, or as you progressed a lot more from there? Because I know, again, going back to, starting at that young age, as you got more experience, did you have a little bit more involvement in the tactics I say tactics, but in terms of the planning, for the more experience that you gained and the more knowledge that you gained?
Yes, I'd say after 2012, the culture and the national team shifted from, I wouldn't say a dictatorship at all. I'd say that it was kind of their way and their way only. But then after 2012, when the changes happened, they realized that actually, because athletes, like, they are competing and it is their career, they should be responsible for their career rather than being spoon-fed information. They should
Right.
actually be part of the conversation. So since 2012, it was actually, they said, right, you're as responsible as they are. They're just guides, and it's up to you. They'll give you all the information available to you, and then it's up to you to decide. So actually, we became 100% part of the conversation, but also we get to decide because it was, we got all that responsibility, which obviously was quite weird at first because I thought, so if I made a big mistake, it's on me, pretty much. But no, it wasn't. Nobody blamed anybody. We got through things as a team, but being part of that, being part of the decision making process was great for me because what it allowed me to do was it allowed me to learn about every single practitioner's job and what they had to go through to monitor me and what kind of questions I had to ask them to make them accountable to me. Because you're relying on the physio to make sure that your ranges are good and there's no niggles. You're relying on the nutritionist to get it right in terms of nutritionally. You're obviously relying on your coach to make sure that your program is as the best it could be and the monitoring strategies there in place. So you became like a mini expert on like nutrition, coaching, training programs, writing it, how to prioritize, psychology. So obviously, like I'm not an expert, but you become a mini expert, so you have to learn. So you learn to become, well, basically to ask the right questions, basically.
Yeah, definitely. And I think in terms of that, from there, the more you have an idea of a bigger picture, because especially in individual sports, people just see the end result, whereas actually the work that goes into it, there's a team sort of behind the scenes. So the more you can learn as an athlete, it's the same when I'm working with clients. It's a case of if they can understand a little bit more, know why I'm asking those. Well, yeah, the biggest thing is know why it's happening, know what questions to ask. It makes them not just a robot, but a thinking person to be able to, like, right, okay, how do I make these decisions? What is going to be the best choice from there? And from what you've said, that leads nicely kind of into the next part that I wanted to touch on, because from all those skills that you've learned there, being able to understand, the training, the nutrition, the psychology, going into building a startup, I'm sure there's been a lot of parts to build up from there and become a mini expert in, a lot of other things. Do you just want to give a little bit more information and detail about, the startup and the model that you've created?
Yeah. So to give you some context, I guess I obviously grew up. I grew up in gyms from probably 16. And the one thing that I never asked myself was, why was I the only disabled person in the gym? I never asked that at all. I guess during lockdown, you have more time to reflect. And obviously, I was still training for Tokyo and doing my PhD. But the other time, I was like reflecting on my career, asking myself whether or not I was good enough or if I was actually satisfied with my career sort of thing. The one thing that I thought about wasn't the medals and the records or anything like that. It was actually, has it actually changed since I was a kid in terms of more disabled people just going to the gym? Forget about just like powerlifting, just going to the gym to be healthy like everyone else
Yeah.
and to do it independently without relying on able-bodied people to guide them. Um, so I thought, well, the answer is probably no, because it's been like 17 years since I started. And we're still seeing that massive gap in the fitness industry with able-bodied people and disabled people. So I thought to myself, well, there must be a fitness app out there, especially designed for the disability community. And I want to go find out where it is and how it's kind of what features does it have. So I spent about 2 hours searching for this non-existent app. Then I realized quite quickly that actually it doesn't exist. Um, So I thought, okay, that's one, that's outrageous, especially in the times we're in now.
Yeah.
And two, actually, I started writing like features down of what an accessible app would look like, just like, just what I think,
Mm-hmm.
nothing major. Within an hour, I had this paper of what an app could look like a mini framework. I thought, well, it looks all right, but this is just my opinion. And also, as a disabled person, you can say that I'm lucky in terms of the opportunities that I've had. So actually, I'm probably out of touch. So I'm gonna leave it for a day or two and really reflect on whether or not I want to even think about doing it.
Mm.
So after 2 days, I was like, you know what? I need to find somebody that could do it. So like give it to them and they'll do it and not me because I'm not an entrepreneur, I'm not a tech person, I'm just an athlete. So I called up my manager at the time. I said, "Oh, I've got a crazy idea, but I need somebody to, ask me loads of questions about it, make me accountable, just like do something." When I told him about the idea and the features and how it could work, he said, "Yeah, that's a crazy idea, but I think you're the only one that can pull it off." And I was like, "What do you mean?" It's like, well, like all the attributes as an athlete you have as an entrepreneur. Like it's the same thing. It's all about process. It's all about long goals. It's all about having the best team around you. All about learning and being adaptable. You've got all that quite easily. And I was like, yeah, but I don't know how to code. I don't know, like, I don't know what I'm doing. So yeah, we built it together during lockdown, which was crazy because you couldn't actually meet up with anybody. And then within a year of the idea, we launched it. Yeah,
Awesome.
quite remarkable. Obviously, training for Paralympic Games and doing a PhD on top, and then launching this. So it was quite a hectic year.
Yeah, awesome. And with that, it's like with anything, the main thing that you said there was sort of like the accessibility, because especially with the strength training side of things, there's variations and things that we can do to help, and especially like what you've said there, not just necessarily to get involved in powerlifting, but just from a health point of view. People talk about the Fitbits and the technology in terms of the cardio side of things, whereas strength training has a big impact on health. What has been the response, from the app? And as well in terms of, because the entry point for strength training, there's something that we can always do. Do you think that has opened up the entry point of getting involved in strength training?
Yeah, so I think the idea behind it is that I wanted disabled people to actually go to the gym and actually integrate in society.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew that gyms themselves are not fully accessible. So you're asking a disabled person to go to a gym and struggle and have that experience actually be not great.
Yeah.
So what the app does, it's kind of progressive. So what it does, it has a library of video exercises that is performed by somebody of your impairment. So you know exactly how it's adapted to your impairment. So we don't give out training programs. So this is where the learning comes in. What the user can do, because they're the expert on their impairment, not me, they create their own training session through the video exercises that we give them. Now, what that does is they get to factor in 3 locations: home-based, outdoor-based, and gym-based. So if they've never been to a gym before, they can start at home, and then when they get comfortable, they can progress and actually eventually go to the gym. The idea for me, the end goal is they go to the gym and integrate and actually have fun and actually be around the society, not staying at home. So I want them to actually go out. But I do understand with gyms being the way they are, they have to get fit and active somehow. So I thought, well, how do I tackle the gym problem? So one of the features in the app is the explore section, where users can rate the accessibility of any gym in the local area.
Right.
So the user has power to rate the accessibility of anything around them in terms of gyms and sporting facilities, and that will give disabled people confidence about where is the most accessible place for them to train.
Yeah, I think the key thing that you said there is that confidence, that confidence side of things, because with that, it's, I think the gym can be you know, an intimidating place, you know, and not be as accessible. Whereas having that there, building up that confidence, you know, is kind of stacking everything in terms of the pros of, look, this is what we can do. You know, we can get to these other gyms and increase that. And I think in terms of the development of, you know, going from the home to outside to the gym, it kind of builds it up a little bit like what you were saying, you know, at the start in terms of that periodization. That's kind of like the bigger picture as well. So even though, because it was interesting, you said they're obviously feeling potentially feeling a little bit out of touch, being competing at the elite level, but equally that same planning can be the exact same for somebody who just wants to go to the gym, just wants to feel stronger. Because from there, from like what you've said, all the attributes of an athlete, applying that to the business side of things, everyone can still get those, you know, benefits from there. What kind of is the future for the app? Where do you see sort of the development of that going?
Well, I launched it for a few reasons, but the big one was to actually show the fitness industry that it can be done with appetite and actually execution. Because I'm sick and tired of the fitness industry leaving disabled people behind.
Mm-hmm.
So I've managed to prove that it can be done. And I guess for me, it's the future is making it the most accessible fitness app there's ever been, which would mean that I might have to have maybe 180 plus impairments in the app, which will take a very long time because of the filming content. But that has to be the aim. That has to be the ultimate. If as an athlete, the Paralympic Games is the ultimate, then for a fitness app like this, it has to be the most accessible. That has to be the aim. And that's the goal. It's obviously a big one. A lot of people think it's near impossible to cater for everybody, but if that's not the aim, then there's no point starting anything like this.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good point. You know, it's got to be that case of, I think that's a really you're similar to me in that respect. I use always sporting analogies as well. You know, what's the ultimate? You know, apply that to sport. What's the ultimate? You know, why can't that be done? Obviously you've said there in terms of the factors of time, but that's the thing of, you know, we can still find that time to add into it and build it up from there. Same as, again, you know, to mention it again, you know, 4 years, you know, for the games, it's that thought process of, look, we've got time to be able to do that. You can find time to do that, finding time to add it up from there. Thanks a lot, Ali, for taking the time to jump on. Quite a lot of topics covered there and a few tangents thrown in. The last question that I like to ask is, from everything that we've chatted about there, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom?
Oh, wow. So I always say that when it comes to goal setting, you shouldn't limit yourself. I feel like a lot of people are kind of skeptical about what they can achieve in the future. So I always say to people, aim for the impossible, like for something that a lot of people think you're crazy for. Even if you get close to it, you've done something pretty special anyway. And you know what? Sometimes you actually do pull it off. Yeah, aim for the possible and try to get as close as possible because you know you've actually achieved great. But a lot of people limit themselves in terms of how big they aim for things.
Yeah, definitely. I think as you were saying that, I think the phrase that comes to mind is what is it? Shoot for the moon and land on the stars, or shoot for the stars and land on the moon. Like that's still
Exactly.
that's still pretty impressive. I think sometimes, you know, people have a fear of failure, but then I think equally there's that fear of success. Like what happens if you actually do, you know, achieve it? What actually if you do go from there, rather than, you know, like what you mentioned with the app of, you know, right, this is what I want to aim for. You know, there is a possibility that you will achieve it. You know, there's another phrase where it's keep pretending who you want to be until you become that person. You know, it's everything is within control. Thanks again, Ali. Really enjoyed chatting with you today. If anyone has any questions about what we've chatted about today, questions about the app, or just see the content and information that you put out there, where could people find you or reach out to you?
Yeah, so like you can probably follow me on social media. You can follow the app on Exercise. So yeah, I guess just reach out on social media and ask questions. I'll reply.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Ali, for taking the time to jump on. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.